Welcome, dear listener. Before you lies a journey backward through time to an era when the Mediterranean Sea was not a vacation destination, but a highway of empires, a battlefield of wooden vessels, and a prison for countless forgotten souls. Tonight, we invite you to settle into comfort, to let the weight of your day dissolve, and to drift alongside us into the ancient world of Roman maritime power. Close your eyes if you wish. Breathe deeply. There is no urgency here. No need for alertness. Simply allow these stories from 2,000 years ago to wash over you like gentle waves. We will explore a world of stark contrasts. The world of those who moved empires with their broken hands, and those who commanded from cushioned seats. We will descend into ship hulls that reeked of human suffering, then ascend to marble villas overlooking azure bays. We will meet an admiral whose genius shaped history and examine an ancient machine that challenges everything we thought we knew about the past. The Mediterranean, you might imagine, sun-drenched and sparkling, was once traversed by vessels powered not by wind alone, but by human muscle, human pain, and human endurance beyond what most of us can fathom. Yet even in darkness, there were moments of strange beauty, rhythms that became meditation, and the odd comfort of knowing exactly what each day would demand. Let us begin where history so rarely begins. At the bottom, in the belly of a ship, where the Empire's power was truly generated. Segment 1. The Galley Rower's Ordeal. Imagine yourself waking in absolute darkness. Not the darkness of a comfortable bedroom, but the thick, pressing darkness of a ship's hull 20 feet below the waterline. The darkness itself seems to have texture here, heavy with moisture, laden with salt, tinged with the unmistakable scent of unwashed human bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, chest to back, in impossible proximity. You are lying on a wooden bench, perhaps 3 feet long and 18 inches wide. This bench is your entire world. It has been your world for 60 days now. Though you have lost precise count, you know it is still night, because the drum has not yet begun. And in that silence before dawn, the creaking of the ship's timber and the gentle slosh of water against the hull create an almost peaceful symphony. Your hands throb with a dull, familiar ache. Even before you open your eyes fully, you are aware of them. The calluses built over weeks of gripping the same section of ore, the fresh blisters that formed yesterday, now weeping clear fluid, the older wounds that have scarred over with new, tougher skin. Your hands are transforming, slowly, into instruments suited to only one purpose. The shackle around your left ankle announces itself with a shift of your leg. It is iron, crude but effective, connected by a length of chain to the timber that runs the length of the rowing deck. You have perhaps 4 feet of movement in any direction from your bench. This is the boundary of your existence. As dim pre-dawn light begins to filter through the narrow gaps between deck boards above, you can make out the shapes of your fellow rowers. To your left, the old Greek man, you never learned his name, sleeps with his mouth open, his breath raspy and thin. He was a pirate once, captured off the coast of Sicily, and his crime now defines his existence just as surely as if he were still plundering ships. To your right, a young man from Germania, taken in one of the northern campaigns, makes a small whimpering sound in his sleep. You have heard him cry most nights for the first month. Now, he does so more quietly. Or perhaps you have simply learned not to hear it. Behind you, 4 rows back, someone is praying in a language you do not recognize. The words drift through the darkness, a quiet murmur that might be Latin, or might be Phoenician, or might be any of the dozen tongues represented in this floating prison. Prayer is common here. Some pray to their native gods, some to Neptune, some to gods whose names are whispered secrets. Whether anyone listens is a question that receives no answer except the drum, day after day, striking out its relentless rhythm. The air is thick. In your first week, you retched constantly from the stench. 170 men chained to benches, with no privacy, no dignity, and only brief moments when you could relieve yourself into the bilge channels that run along the hull's bottom. Now your nose has adapted, or perhaps given up. You breathe through your mouth when you remember to, drawing in the heavy, warm air that tastes of salt and sweat and something else, something sour and organic that you have learned not to contemplate too deeply. You shift your weight and your back protests immediately. The muscles along your spine, from your neck to your lower back, have become a landscape of constant discomfort. Rowing 12 hours yesterday, 11 the day before, sometimes 14 when the captain demanded extra speed, has reshaped your entire upper body. Your shoulders are broader now, your arms corded with lean muscle, but the cost is measured in the deep, grinding ache that never fully disappears. The bench beneath you is worn smooth by countless bodies before yours. You wonder about them sometimes, in the moments before sleep claims you. Were they freed? Did they die at this very bench? Were they sold to another ship, another captain, another endless journey? The wood offers no answers, only a surface so polished by human contact that it almost feels soft. Light increases incrementally. You can now see the oar, your oar, though you own nothing, and this oar will be here long after you are gone. It is 18 feet long, made from seasoned pine, heavy enough that 4 men normally share the rowing duty, but the man who sat at the forward position on your oar collapsed 2 days ago. He had been coughing for a week, each cough wetter and more painful than the last, until finally he simply slumped forward and did not rise again. 2 sailors came, checked his breath, and unshackled him. They dragged him up through the hatch. You never learned if he was dead or merely dying. You have not seen him since. His absence means you and your 3 remaining benchmates must compensate. The oar requires a certain minimum force to move efficiently through the water. With 4 men, it is brutal labor. With 3, it is nearly impossible. Your hands have bled more in the past 2 days than in the previous month. The drum begins. It is not loud. The drummer sits somewhere, amidships, on the deck above your head, but in the hollow resonance of the hull, the sound is inescapable. A single strike, then another. The rhythm is exactly 1 beat per second, calibrated over centuries to be the most efficient pace a human body can sustain for hours at a stretch. Around you, men stir. The morning ritual has begun. You sit up, moving carefully, because rapid movement makes your head spin. Your daily ration was consumed last night. A handful of bread soaked in pasca, the vinegar wine mixture that prevents scurvy but tastes like drinking pain. Your stomach is empty and will remain so until the evening ration arrives. Thirst is worse. The water barrel sits at the far end of the rowing deck, and twice each day, a sailor moves along the benches with a ladle, pouring a measure into each man's cupped hands. You have learned to drink without spilling, an acquired skill that once would have seemed absurd. The man from Germania is awake now, his eyes distant. He reaches for the oar with the automatic movement of someone caught in an endless routine. The old Greek coughs, spits into the bilge water at his feet, and does the same. You place your hands on the smooth wood, feeling the familiar grooves worn by your grip, and you wait. The hortator, the rowing master, shouts something from his platform. You do not understand all the words, but you understand the command. Oars out. As one, 170 men push their oars through the ports in the hull, extending them over the water. Through the narrow opening, you catch a glimpse of dawn, pink and gold, touching a sea that looks almost inviting from this angle. Then, your view is blocked by the oar blade, painted red and already wet with spray. Another shout. The drum rhythm changes, increasing very slightly. This is the preparatory beat. You lean forward, hands positioned exactly where they must be, your feet braced against the footboard. The man behind you on the same oar does likewise. You can feel his presence, the way you have learned to anticipate his movements, to synchronize without speaking. In this, at least, there is a strange intimacy. The hortator's voice rises. Incipite. Begin. You pull. The physics of rowing a Roman galley are brutally simple. Your oar blade, approximately 2 feet wide at its end, must cut through water with enough force to overcome the resistance of the sea and the weight of an entire warship. 40 tons of timber, equipment, marines, supplies, and 170 rowers. Your contribution is a fraction of the total force, but you must deliver it perfectly timed with every other rower, stroke after stroke after stroke. You pull the oar backward, your hands sliding along its length, your body weight shifting from legs to back to arms in a movement that must be smooth, efficient, and powerful. The oar comes toward your chest. You feel the resistance of the water through the wood, a living pressure that fights your every effort. Then, as the oar reaches the end of its stroke, you must push it forward again. Quickly, blade lifted above the water to reduce drag, ready for the next pull. One stroke, The drum beats again. 2 strokes. Your breathing synchronizes with the rhythm. Breathe in during the recovery. Breathe out during the pull. Never hold your breath. The rowing master beat that lesson into everyone during your first week, using a stick liberally applied to the backs of those who forgot. 10 strokes, 20, 50. After several minutes, the ship begins to move with purpose. You can feel it through the bench, through the deck beneath your feet. The vessel is no longer merely floating, but gliding, cutting through the Mediterranean with the accumulated force of human muscle. The drum continues, 1 beat per second, 3,600 beats per hour. Your world narrows to the oar, the drum, the pull, the recovery. Thought becomes difficult. There is only rhythm, only the mechanical necessity of the next stroke. This is both the horror and the mercy of galley rowing. The mind can escape, can enter a state that is neither awake nor asleep, where time passes in a blur of repeated motion. Salt spray begins to come through the oar ports as the ship picks up speed. The water is cold, shocking against your skin, and it stings the open wounds on your hands. You have learned not to flinch. The spray will continue all day. By evening, your skin will be crusted with dried salt, tight and itching, until the seawater washes over you again, and the cycle continues. Hours pass. The sun is fully up now. You can tell by the quality of light that filters down from above. The heat begins to build. The hull, made of tarred wood, absorbs sunlight and transforms the rowing deck into something resembling a baker's oven. Sweat pours from every body, pooling on benches, dripping to the bilge water below, creating a humid atmosphere that makes each breath feel like drinking warm soup. You continue to row. The man beside you, the old Greek, begins to flag around what might be the 3rd hour. His strokes become slightly less powerful, his timing fractionally off. You compensate automatically, pulling harder on your section of the oar. This is survival. If the oar falls out of rhythm, the rowing master notices, and the rowing master's punishment is swift. Better to exhaust yourself than to earn his attention. Midday approaches, though you mark time only by the sun's angle through the oar port and the increasing heat. Your shoulders are screaming now, a burning sensation that radiates down your spine. Your hands have gone beyond pain into a kind of numbness, though you can feel warm wetness on the oar handle and know you are bleeding again. The drum continues. It has never stopped. It will not stop. Around the 4th hour, though you have lost any precise sense, a shout comes from above. The drum rhythm changes, accelerating. Battle speed. Your heart sinks. Battle speed means you will row at 2 strokes per second instead of 1. Battle speed means the ship needs to maneuver quickly, to chase, or to flee, and your exhaustion is irrelevant to this need. You pull faster. The oar becomes a blur. Your breathing is ragged now, coming in gasps that cannot quite supply enough air. The man behind you groans with each stroke, a low sound of pure animal effort. The young German has gone pale. his face slick with sweat. But he pulls and pulls and pulls. This burst of speed lasts perhaps 20 minutes, though it feels like hours. Then, mercifully, the drum returns to normal pace. You have no idea what caused the acceleration. Perhaps pirates were spotted. Perhaps the captain simply wanted to test his crew's readiness. You will never know. Knowledge of the world beyond this hull is not granted to men like you. The afternoon stretches on. Time loses all meaning. There is only the drum, the oar, the endless repetitive motion that has worn grooves not just in wood, but in your very consciousness. Your daily ration arrives. As the sun begins its descent, a sailor moves along the rowing deck. With a bucket, each man receives a handful of bread that has been soaked in pasca until it is soft enough to chew quickly. The bread is coarse, gritty with impurities, but it is food. You eat without pleasure, simply refueling a body that has become a machine. The water ladle follows. You cup your shackled hands and receive your measure. Perhaps a pint, perhaps slightly less. The water is tepid, tasting of the wooden barrel and something faintly metallic, but you drink it all, feeling it spread through your parched throat. Then you return your hands to the oar. The meal break lasted perhaps 5 minutes. The drum continues. Evening comes slowly. The light through the oar ports shifts from gold to orange to deep purple. The heat begins to release its grip on the hull, and the temperature drops to something almost bearable. You have been rowing for 12 hours. Your body has moved beyond exhaustion into a strange state of automated function. You are no longer consciously controlling your movements. Your muscles have memorized the pattern so thoroughly that they continue without your participation. Finally, mercifully, as the last light fades from the sky, the drum stops. The hortator's voice rings out, "Cessate, cease." You stop pulling. For a moment, your hands remain on the oar, frozen in position by habit. Then slowly, you release your grip. The sudden absence of resistance makes you sway slightly, your balance temporarily confused. Around you, 170 men slump forward in unison, a wave of exhaustion made visible. Some groan, some pray, some simply sit in silence, staring at nothing. Your hands throb with renewed intensity now that they are no longer moving. In the growing darkness, you cannot see them clearly, but you can feel the wetness of blood and plasma, the swollen flesh around your blisters, the way your fingers have begun to curl naturally into the shape of gripping an oar. The bilge water has risen during the day, as it always does. It sloshes around your feet now, a mixture of seawater that has leaked through the hull, the collective waste of 170 men, and vomit from those whose stomachs could not handle the constant motion. You have learned to ignore it, just as you have learned to ignore so much. Sleep comes quickly in this place. There is no energy for anything else. The old Greek is already unconscious, his head tilted back against the timber. The young German curls into himself on his bench, making his body as small as possible, perhaps returning in his mind to a home he will never see again. You lie down on your bench, the shackle heavy on your ankle, your body radiating heat and pain in equal measures. Above you, somewhere on the deck, you have not seen in weeks, Marines and sailors move about freely, eating hot meals, speaking in normal voices, inhabiting a world of dignity and choice. Here, in the darkness of the hull, you close your eyes. Tomorrow, the drum will begin again. Tomorrow, you will row. Tomorrow will be exactly like today, and the day before, and the day that will follow. This is the existence of a galley rower, not the grand battles that historians chronicle, not the strategies of admirals or the glory of naval supremacy. This is the foundation upon which an empire's maritime power was built. Human bodies chained to benches, moving oars through water, day after day after day. The mechanics of this system were refined over centuries. Roman galleys, the sleek biremes and triremes that dominated Mediterranean warfare, required enormous human power to achieve their fearsome speed and maneuverability. A standard trireme carried approximately 170 rowers, arranged in 3 tiers, each tier offset slightly from the others to allow the oars to enter the water at optimal angles. The engineering was elegant. The human cost was devastating. The demographics of galley rowers reflected Rome's social hierarchy inverted. Slaves, yes, war captives sold in bulk to naval contractors or those condemned to the galleys as punishment for crimes both real and imagined. Criminals, certainly. The galleys were viewed as a slower death sentence than execution, extracting years of labor before the inevitable end. Prisoners of war filled many benches, particularly during periods of expansion when fresh populations fell under Roman control. In times of emergency, even free men of the poorest classes might volunteer for rowing positions, though the distinction between voluntary and coerced grew thin when starvation was the alternative. Some men rowed for years. The toll on the human body was cumulative and catastrophic. Spinal damage from the constant forward and back motion was nearly universal. Hands became twisted claws, fingers locked in permanent grip position, even when unoccupied. Lungs weakened from breathing the humid, fouled air of the hull. Infections were constant. Any break in the skin became a potential entry point for illness in the unsanitary conditions. Scurvy, caused by lack of fresh food, made teeth fall out and old wounds reopen. Yet some survived. Some even, through mechanisms not fully understood, adapted. The human body has a remarkable capacity to normalize horror, to find equilibrium in circumstances that initially seem unsurvivable. The rhythm of rowing could become almost meditative. The community of suffering created bonds, unspoken but real. Men who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods found common ground in shared pain. The psychological dimension was perhaps most cruel. Unlike hard labor in mines or fields, galley rowing offered no sense of accomplishment, no visible product of effort. You moved an oar through water. The water closed behind the blade. Tomorrow, you would move it again. There was no progression, no skill to master that would improve your situation, no hope of advancement. This was labor stripped to its most existential meaninglessness. Pure motion, repeated infinitely, signifying nothing beyond the ship's movement. Maritime warfare tactics depended absolutely on these forgotten men. The famous ram tactics of Roman naval combat, where ships would accelerate to maximum speed and drive a bronze ram into an enemy vessel's hull, required perfect coordination from rowers who had seconds to go. From standard pace to sprint speed, the skilled maneuvering that allowed Roman galleys to outflank and surround enemy formations demanded that men in airless, dark hulls respond instantly to drum commands they could barely hear, adjusting their efforts to turn a massive vessel with precision. In the famous Battle of Actium, where Agrippa defeated the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra, the true victors were the thousands of anonymous rowers who executed complex maneuvers for hours in rough seas, maintaining formation while ballistas launched projectiles overhead and marines clashed on decks above. The historians recorded Agrippa's genius, Octavian's triumph, Cleopatra's flight. No one recorded the names of the men below or counted how many died when ships were rammed and sank, still chained to their benches, drowning in darkness as water rushed in. The archaeology of shipwrecks has revealed the reality more clearly than texts. Skeletons found at rowing positions show distinctive bone deformities, enlarged attachment points where muscles connected to bone under constant stress, spinal compression, and fractures that healed poorly. Some skeletons are found still shackled, evidence of how quickly ships could sink and how little chance rowers had of escape. The system was efficient in its cruel way. Galleys could cross the Mediterranean relatively quickly, could patrol coastlines, could respond to threats with a flexibility that sailing vessels of the era could not match. This mobility was purchased with human suffering on an industrial scale. At night, in ports, when rowers were sometimes allowed on deck briefly for air, they would look up at stars they hadn't seen in weeks. They would feel wind on their faces, unfiltered by deck boards and oar ports. They would remember, perhaps, that they were human beings, not merely the biological motors that powered Rome's naval dominance. Then they would be sent below again. The shackles would close, the darkness would return, and in the morning, the drum would begin. You wake before dawn, chained to your bench. The stench of 170 unwashed bodies packed into the hull overwhelming your senses. Your hands are already calloused and bleeding from yesterday's 12-hour rowing session. The drum begins its relentless beat. 1 stroke per second, 3,600 strokes per hour. Tomorrow will be exactly the same. This is the reality that histories rarely record, not because it wasn't known, but because it was understood to be ordinary. This was simply how naval power worked, how empires moved across water, how Rome controlled sea lanes, and projected force across continents. The galley rower's ordeal was not an aberration or a temporary cruelty. It was systematic, refined, and essential to Roman naval supremacy. It continued for centuries, relatively unchanged, because it was effective. And in that effectiveness, in that systematic efficiency, lies perhaps the most unsettling truth. Civilizations build their grandest achievements on foundations of human suffering that become so normalized, so integrated into the social machinery that they stop being seen as remarkable at all. The rowers fade into history as nameless statistics, their individual stories lost, their collective agony reduced to a practical necessity for historians to mention in passing when discussing naval tactics and maritime logistics. But you can imagine yourself there, in the darkness, chained to the bench, hands on the oar, waiting for the drum to begin. Segment 2. The life and campaigns of Agrippa. Let us ascend now from the darkness of the rowing deck, from the anonymous suffering of those who powered Rome's ships, and turn our attention to the man who commanded them, the architect of naval supremacy, the strategist whose genius shaped the very course of the Mediterranean world. His name was Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, and though he orchestrated the movements of thousands of ships and tens of thousands of men, his own story begins in relative obscurity in a place far from the sea. Imagine the Italian countryside in the year 63 BCE. The details of Agrippa's earliest years are frustratingly sparse in the upper historical record, a situation that would characterize much of his personal life, even as his public achievements were meticulously documented. He was born into a family of modest means, neither patrician nor destitute, occupying that middle space in Roman society where lineage mattered less than opportunity, and opportunity less than the right connections. The right connection, in Agrippa's case, came early, in his youth, possibly in his early teens. He encountered a boy who would change the trajectory of both their lives. Gaius Octavius, the great-nephew of Julius Caesar. How they met, what drew them together, what conversations passed between them in those formative years. All of this is lost to time. What remains is the evidence of what followed, a friendship so profound, so enduring, that it would survive civil war, political intrigue, and the transformation of a republic into an empire. The texture of that friendship is worth contemplating as you settle more deeply into rest. Friendship between powerful men in Rome was always complicated, always tinged with political calculation. Yet, between Agrippa and the young man who would become Augustus, there seems to have been something genuine beneath the layers of utility. Agrippa never sought to outshine Octavian, never grasped for supreme power, even when his military genius made him arguably more capable than his friend. And Octavian, for his part, trusted Agrippa with responsibilities that could have made a more ambitious man dangerous. Consider The year 44 BCE, Julius Caesar has been assassinated. The Roman world trembles on the edge of chaos. Young Octavian, 18 years old, suddenly and unexpectedly named Caesar's heir, faced a choice: claim his inheritance or retreat to safety. He chose to claim it, and beside him, choosing to follow a teenage heir into the maelstrom of Roman civil politics, was Agrippa. They trained together in Apollonia, in what is now Albania. Picture the two of them in the morning light. Octavian, thin and often ill, possessed of an intelligence that burned bright and cold. Agrippa, more robust, physically powerful, with a mind that understood logistics and strategy with instinctive clarity. They studied rhetoric, military theory, the campaigns of Alexander. They must have talked late into the night, planning, scheming, understanding even then that the world they had known was ending, and that they might shape what came next. When word came of Caesar's death, they crossed to Italy. Agrippa was perhaps 20 years old. He was stepping into a conflict that would consume the Republic and birth an empire, and he would become one of its primary architects. The years that followed blur together in the historical record, a succession of battles, political maneuverings, temporary alliances and betrayals. What matters for our purposes, what draws us toward the sea and the ships and the coming naval campaigns, is that in these years, Agrippa revealed his particular genius. He was not merely a competent general. He understood something deeper, that war was as much about infrastructure and logistics as about courage and tactics. While others fought, Agrippa built. While others chased glory, Agrippa solved problems. He improved roads so armies could move faster. He organized supply lines so legions didn't starve. He studied engineering with the same intensity others applied to philosophy, and gradually, as Octavian's position strengthened, as enemies fell away or were defeated, it became clear that Agrippa was being prepared for something specific: the sea. Rome's destiny, Octavian understood, would be decided on water. Let us move forward now to the year 31st BCE. The Roman world had been divided. Octavian controlled the west. Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, controlled the east, ruling alongside Cleopatra, the Ptolemaic queen of Egypt. The propaganda flew between them, each side claiming legitimacy, each painting the other as the true threat to Roman values. But beneath the rhetoric, the situation was simple. Two men, backed by vast resources, would fight for sole control of the Mediterranean world, and that fight would be naval. This presented Octavian with a problem. Antony was an experienced military commander with access to Egyptian wealth and shipbuilding resources. His fleet was enormous, perhaps 500 warships, some of them massive vessels carrying multiple decks of rowers and armed with artillery that could devastate lighter craft. Cleopatra had contributed ships from her own navy, vessels built in the Egyptian tradition, grand and impressive. Octavian's fleet was smaller, less impressive, potentially outmatched. But Octavian had Agrippa. Imagine Agrippa in the months leading up to the confrontation. He was, by this time, perhaps 32 years old. His hair might have been beginning to gray at the temples. His hands were scarred from years of campaigns. He had commanded legions in Gaul, fought in Illyria, and most recently had been entrusted with the enormous task of rebuilding Rome's naval capabilities. He approached the task with characteristic thoroughness. First, the ships themselves. Agrippa understood that naval combat in this era was not primarily about ship-to-ship artillery exchanges. It was about ramming, about boarding, about turning naval battles into infantry fights conducted on wooden decks above deep water. The ships needed to be fast, maneuverable, and sturdy enough to survive collisions. He designed or commissioned the design of a new class of vessel. These were smaller than Antony's massive warships, lighter and more agile. They couldn't carry as many marines or as much artillery, but they could turn more quickly, could respond faster to changing battlefield conditions. In naval warfare, speed and flexibility often mattered more than raw power. Then there was the matter of the corvus, the boarding bridge that earlier Roman naval innovations had developed. The traditional corvus was a heavy, cumbersome device, a bridge that could be dropped onto an enemy ship, allowing Roman marines to storm across. It was effective, but made ships top-heavy and difficult to maneuver. Agrippa refined it, creating a lighter version that could be deployed more quickly and didn't compromise the ship's stability. The exact specifications are lost to us, but contemporary accounts mention his improvements with admiration. Next, the base of operations. Agrippa needed somewhere to assemble, train, and supply a fleet capable of challenging Antony's armada. He chose, or perhaps created, Portus Julius, a naval base on the Bay of Naples. This was engineering on a staggering scale. Artificial harbors dug into the coastline, shipyards capable of producing dozens of vessels simultaneously, training facilities where crews could practice maneuvers in protected waters. The work proceeded through 33 and 32 BCE. Ships emerged from the yards, their timbers still green, their hulls sealed with pitch. Crews were assembled, rowers acquired from all the usual sources, Marines recruited and trained, sailors selected for their experience, and overseeing it all, moving between construction sites and planning sessions and training exercises, was Agrippa. What did he think about in quiet moments? Did he ever stand at the edge of the harbor as the sun set, watching the light play across the water, and wonder if his preparations would be sufficient? Did he walk among the rowers, seeing in their chained forms the human cost of naval power? Did he feel the weight of responsibility, knowing that thousands of lives and the fate of Rome itself might depend on decisions he would make in the chaos of battle? The historical record is silent. We have his public actions meticulously chronicled. His private thoughts remain tantalizingly out of reach. By the summer of 31 BCE, both fleets were ready. Antony's forces gathered on the western coast of Greece, near the promontory of Actium. His strategy seemed to be to force a decisive naval engagement, using his superior numbers and larger ships to overwhelm Octavian's fleet. Agrippa's strategy was more subtle. He understood that Antony's greatest advantage, his massive fleet, was also a vulnerability. Large fleets required enormous supplies. Hundreds of ships meant thousands of mouths to feed, constant need for fresh water, ongoing maintenance. If those supply lines could be disrupted, the fleet would weaken from within. So Agrippa moved first, not against the fleet itself, but against the supply bases. His ships raided coastal positions, captured supply ships, harassed Antony's foraging parties. It was unglamorous work, the kind that rarely makes it into epic poetry, but it was devastatingly effective. Antony's crews began to suffer from malnutrition and disease. Morale declined, desertions increased. Imagine Agrippa receiving reports in his command tent, scouts describing the state of Antony's fleet, captains returning from raids with news of captured supplies, intelligence suggesting that Antony's men were growing desperate, that the Grand Fleet was beginning to fracture from within. Every piece of information would have been analyzed, considered, fitted into the larger strategic picture that Agrippa was assembling in his mind. The Battle of Actium, when it finally came on September 2nd, 31st BCE, was almost anticlimactic, given the months of buildup. Antony's fleet, weakened by privation and poor morale, sailed out to meet Octavian's forces in the Ionian Sea. The accounts of the battle are fragmentary and sometimes contradictory, written by victors, with their own narratives to promote, but certain details emerge clearly. Agrippa commanded the right wing of Octavian's fleet. His ships moved with practiced coordination, the result of months of drilling in the protected waters of Portus Julius. When Antony's larger vessels attempted to close and board, Agrippa's lighter ships danced away, refusing the engagement, using their superior speed to stay just out of reach. The fighting, when it occurred, was brutal in the way all ancient naval combat was brutal. Ships closing at ramming speed, the terrible sound of wood splintering, the sudden lurch as a ram struck home below the waterline, Marines pouring across boarding bridges, fighting on decks slick with blood and seawater, the screams of wounded men, the clash of iron on iron, the smoke from fire arrows that could turn a ship into an inferno in minutes. But Agrippa's strategy was not to win through direct combat. He was executing a more elegant plan, to fragment Antony's fleet, to use superior maneuverability, to create gaps in the enemy formation, to turn an organized fleet into isolated groups of ships that could be surrounded and overwhelmed piecemeal. It worked. Antony's fleet began to break apart. His larger ships, magnificent in appearance but cumbersome in practice, found themselves unable to coordinate effectively. Cleopatra, commanding a squadron of Egyptian vessels, saw the battle turning and made the decision to flee south with her ships intact. Antony, seeing her departure, abandoned his own fleet and followed with a small group of vessels. The remaining ships fought on for a time, but the battle was already decided. Agrippa's forces pressed their advantage, and by the end of the day, Antony's grand fleet had been destroyed or captured. The men who had rowed those ships, who had pulled oars for hours as the battle raged around them, died by the hundreds when their vessels were rammed and sank. Their names, as always, went unrecorded. Octavian had won. Within a year, Antony and Cleopatra would be dead, and Octavian, soon to be renamed Augustus, would be the sole ruler of the Roman world. The Republic, in all but name, had ended. The empire had begun, and Agrippa had made it possible. In the years that followed, his importance only grew. Augustus understood that he needed Agrippa, that the empire required his organizational genius, his loyalty, his ability to turn grand visions into concrete realities. So, Agrippa was given command after command, responsibility after responsibility. He campaigned in Gaul, suppressing revolts and securing the northern frontiers. Picture him there in the cold forests of Germania, far from the Mediterranean warmth, commanding legions through terrain that was hostile and unfamiliar. Roman soldiers, trained for open field battles in warm climates, had to adapt to dense woodlands and German tactics of ambush and retreat. Agrippa managed it, not through brilliant tactical innovations, but through patient, methodical application of Roman military doctrine. He built roads through the forests, established supply depots, constructed forts at strategic positions. The campaigns were successful, if not spectacular. Then there was Hispania, where rebellious tribes in the northern mountains posed a constant threat. Agrippa was sent to pacify the region in 19 BCE. The fighting was difficult. Mountain warfare against an enemy that knew the terrain intimately, that could strike and then melt back into the hills. Agrippa's approach was systematic. Divide the resistance, cut off their supplies, establish permanent Roman presence through forts and colonies. It was effective, though the human cost on both sides was significant. Throughout these campaigns, through decades of military service, Agrippa remained conspicuously loyal to Augustus. He never seems to have entertained thoughts of using his military power to challenge the emperor. This was remarkable in a period when successful generals were often tempted to march on Rome, when military power could be converted into political supremacy. But Agrippa remained content, or at least appeared content, to be the empire's greatest servant rather than its master. Why? We can only speculate. Perhaps the friendship with Augustus was genuine enough to transcend ambition. Perhaps Agrippa understood that the role he played, essential but subordinate, was sustainable in a way that challenging Augustus would not be. Perhaps he simply wasn't interested in the political maneuvering and social performance that being emperor required. He was a builder, a problem solver, an organizer of vast complexity. Let Augustus handle the Senate and the social niceties. Agrippa would make the empire actually function. His marriages reflected his political position. He was married multiple times, each marriage cementing his connection to the imperial family. His final marriage was to Julia, Augustus's daughter, in 21 BCE. She was perhaps 18. He was in his early 40s. The marriage produced 5 children, including Gaius and Lucius Caesar, whom Augustus would adopt as his heirs. Agrippa was thus grandfather to future emperors, his bloodline woven inextricably into the imperial succession. What was his marriage to Julia like? The sources are frustratingly silent on personal matters. Julia was famously spirited, intelligent, and later in life would be exiled for adultery. Though whether she was genuinely unfaithful or simply too independent for Augustus's comfort is debated. Did she and Agrippa find happiness together? Did they simply perform their duties to the state? Did they talk in the evening, sharing thoughts about the strange position they occupied, simultaneously at the center of power and yet subordinate to Augustus's will? We don't know. The private Agrippa remains elusive. What we do know is that he continued to work. His engineering projects went beyond military applications. He oversaw improvements to Rome's water supply, including the Aqua Julia and Aqua Virgo aqueducts. He sponsored public works projects, baths, temples, porticos. He conducted a census. He created maps of the known world, compiling geographical knowledge from across the empire. He was, in modern terms, a technocrat of the highest order, applying systematic thinking to problems of infrastructure and administration. In 13 BCE, Agrippa was sent east to deal with unrest in the Bosporan kingdom. He fell ill during the journey. By the time he returned to Italy in early 12th BCE, he was gravely sick. He died in March of that year in Campania, not far from the Bay of Naples, where he had built his great naval base decades earlier. He was 51 years old. Augustus, the sources tell us, was genuinely grief-stricken. He delivered the funeral oration himself, praising Agrippa's virtues, his loyalty, his service to Rome. Agrippa was buried in Augustus's own mausoleum, an honor reserved for family members, and given a state funeral of unusual grandeur. And then, gradually, he began to fade from public memory. This is the curious thing about Agrippa's legacy. He was Rome's greatest admiral, its most capable general of the Augustan age, the man who made the empire possible. Yet he was not celebrated in the way that Augustus was celebrated. There were no grand monuments specifically to Agrippa's glory, no triumphant arches proclaiming his victories, no poems from the great poets of the age praising his deeds in the way they praised Augustus. This was partly by design. Agrippa had always operated in Augustus's shadow, and Augustus's propaganda machine ensured that ultimate credit flowed to the emperor rather than his subordinates. But it may also have been partly what Agrippa himself wanted. Everything we know about him suggests a man uncomfortable with public adulation, more interested in solving problems than in receiving praise. The result is a strange historical afterlife. Agrippa is recognized by scholars as crucial to Augustus's success, yet he remains somehow one-dimensional in the historical record. We know what he built, where he fought, whom he married, when he died, but we don't know what made him laugh, what kept him awake at night, what he dreamed about when he closed his eyes. Did he ever regret his choice to remain loyal? Did he ever look at Augustus and wonder what it would be like to rule rather than to serve? When he walked past the rowers chained to their benches, powering the ships he had designed, did he ever pause to consider their humanity? Or were they simply components in a larger machine? The questions linger unanswered. The man remains, in important ways, unknowable. What we can say with certainty is that his impact was profound. The Battle of Actium determined the shape of Roman government for centuries. Augustus's victory, which was Agrippa's victory, meant that Rome would be ruled by emperors rather than by senatorial consensus. It meant stability, eventually, but at the cost of republican governance. It meant an empire that would last for centuries, but would never return to the ideals of the old republic and the naval innovations Agrippa pioneered. The lighter, more maneuverable warships, the improved training methods, the strategic use of supply line disruption would influence Mediterranean naval warfare for generations. Future Roman admirals studied his tactics. The naval base at Portus Julius remained operational for decades. His ship designs were copied and refined. Yet for all this, Agrippa himself recedes into the background of history, present but not prominent, essential but not celebrated. He is the man who made Augustus emperor, who built the infrastructure that sustained the early empire, who commanded the greatest naval victory of the age, and he remains, somehow, a mystery. As you drift now toward sleep, consider this. We remember the names of emperors and poets, philosophers, and great senators. We remember those who sought fame, who performed their greatness in public spaces, who left behind words that demanded remembrance. But the man who actually made the empire work, who solved the logistical problems and commanded the fleets and built the aqueducts, he fades into quiet obscurity, known to scholars but absent from popular imagination. His greatest monument is not a building or a statue, but the functioning empire itself, the roads and water systems and secured borders that outlasted him by centuries. Perhaps that is the epitaph Agrippa would have chosen. Not glory, but effectiveness. Not fame, but results. Not immortality through poetry, but the quiet satisfaction of problems solved, of challenges overcome, of loyalty maintained. He died in bed, surrounded by family, having served faithfully for 30 years. The empire continued without him, which was perhaps the greatest proof of his success. He had built systems robust enough to outlast their creator, The waves still roll across the Mediterranean, touching the shores where his ships once sailed. The ruins of Portus Julius lie beneath the water now, submerged by volcanic activity. But they were there for centuries, training the crews that maintained Roman naval supremacy. The aqueducts still carry water into Rome 2,000 years later, still functional, still serving, and somewhere in the dark hull of every ancient galley ever built, the rowers, whose names we'll never know, pulled oars in rhythms designed by strategic minds like Agrippa's, men who saw human beings as tools to be deployed efficiently in service of imperial power. History is written by the victorious and remembered by the prominent, but it is made by thousands of people whose names are forgotten, both those who command and those who serve, those who design great strategies and those who execute them, those who build empires and those who power them with bleeding hands, chained to wooden benches. Agrippa understood this, perhaps. He was both commander and servant, both celebrated and subordinate, both essential and ultimately forgettable in the grand sweep of centuries. Let his story ease you toward sleep, a tale of excellence without glamour, of achievement without drama, of a life lived in service to something larger than himself. For better or worse, the drum has stopped now. The ships have returned to harbor. The Mediterranean is quiet under starlight. Rest now. History continues without urgency. Tomorrow's stories will still be there, waiting patiently in the past, ready to be told again when you return. The Antikythera Mechanism, ancient computer of the deeplet, us turn now from human stories, from admirals and rowers, from battles and bloodshed, and direct our attention to something stranger, something that challenges our comfortable assumptions about the past. Deep beneath the Mediterranean, in the cold darkness where sunlight fades to nothing, where pressure increases with every meter of descent, lie the remnants of countless ships. The seafloor is a museum of human ambition and human tragedy, scattered with amphorae and anchors, bronze statues, and corroded coins, the fragmentary evidence of journeys that ended in storm or reef or simple misfortune. Most of these wrecks will never be found. They rest in their deep water graves, slowly being covered by sediment, their organic materials consumed by time and marine organisms, until eventually nothing remains but scattered pottery and metal objects too dense to dissolve quickly in seawater. But sometimes, rarely, a wreck is discovered, and even more rarely, that wreck contains something that changes how we understand history itself. Imagine the Aegean Sea in the spring of 1900. The water is warming after winter's chill, becoming tolerable for the work of sponge divers, men who make their living descending to the sea floor in heavy canvas suits, connected to the surface by air hoses, harvesting the marine organisms that wealthy Romans and Greeks have used for bathing since ancient times. The work is dangerous. Divers can remain below for only limited periods before the pressure begins to affect them, before the risk of what they called the bends, though they didn't understand the mechanism, becomes too great. They work in cold, dark water, their vision limited, their movements clumsy in the bulky suits. Many divers are injured. Some die, but the sponges fetch good prices, and alternatives for making a living are limited on the small Greek islands where these men live. A team of divers from the island of Simi was returning home from a harvesting expedition off the North African coast. They were following the island chain northward, staying relatively close to shore, when weather forced them to seek shelter near the small island of Antikythera, literally opposite Kythera, named for its position relative to its more famous neighbor. While waiting for the weather to clear, one of the divers, a man named Elias Stadiatis, descended to check if there were any sponges worth harvesting in the area. He went down perhaps 140 feet, deeper than was comfortable, into water that even in spring was cold enough to chill through the canvas suit. What he saw on the bottom made him signal frantically to be pulled up. When he reached the surface and his helmet was removed, he was agitated, possibly incoherent. He described a field of corpses on the seafloor, bodies lying among ruins. The captain of the diving vessel, Dimitrios Kondos, thought perhaps the pressure had affected Stadiatis' mind, a common enough occurrence at that depth, but he decided to descend himself to investigate. Kondos found not corpses, but statues, bronze and marble figures, larger than life, lying scattered across the seafloor, along with pottery, glassware, and the rotted remains of a wooden ship. It was a wreck site, clearly ancient and clearly rich with artifacts. The divers marked the location and continued to Simi, where they reported their discovery to the Greek government. By November of 1900, the Greek Navy had sent a ship to the site, and a systematic recovery operation began. It would continue intermittently for months, with the Simi divers doing the dangerous work of descending to retrieve artifacts. They brought up extraordinary things: a bronze statue of a young man, probably a depiction of Hermes or Perseus, in remarkable condition, a bronze lyre, marble statues that had once been painted in lifelike colors, but now were bleached and worn by centuries underwater, luxury glassware, dozens of amphorae that had once contained wine or oil, gold jewelry, and among these treasures, coated in limestone concretion and corroded nearly beyond recognition, several lumps of bronze that seemed to contain gear mechanisms. At the time, no one paid much attention to these corroded pieces. They were cataloged, cleaned superficially, and stored in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, while scholars focused on the more obviously spectacular finds: the statues, the jewelry, the evidence of ancient artistic achievement. It was nearly 2 years before anyone looked closely at the mechanical fragments. In 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stais was examining the stored artifacts when he noticed that one of the corroded bronze lumps had split, revealing what appeared to be a gear wheel inside. This was unusual, gear mechanisms were not unknown in the ancient world. There were references in texts to various mechanical devices, but actually finding one preserved in recognizable form was extraordinarily rare. Stays began to study the fragments more carefully as the concretion was slowly, painstakingly removed. More gears became visible, and text, tiny Greek letters inscribed on the bronze surfaces describing astronomical phenomena, cycles of the moon, names of months. What emerged over the following years as scholars and scientists examined the device was something that seemed almost impossible. It was a machine, a calculating machine, an analog computer designed to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance. The mechanism, when reconstructed, consisted of at least 30 bronze gears of varying sizes, mounted in a wooden frame about the size of a shoebox. The largest gear had 223 teeth. Some gears were as small as a coin. They were cut with extraordinary precision. The teeth shaped with mathematical accuracy. The gears designed to mesh smoothly and turn in exact ratios. On the front of the device was a dial showing the zodiac calendar and the Egyptian civil calendar. As a hand crank on the side was turned, pointers moved across these dials, indicating the positions of the sun, moon, and the 5 planets known to the ancients. The gearing was designed so that the relationships between these celestial bodies remained accurate. The moon moving faster than the sun, the planets following their own complex paths across the sky. On the back were additional dials, spiral in form, showing eclipse prediction cycles and the 4-year cycle of the Olympic and other Pan-Hellenic Games. Most remarkably, the mechanism incorporated what is known as a differential gear, a system where the rotation of one gear affects the rotation of others in mathematically precise relationships. This allowed the device to model the moon's orbit accurately, accounting for the fact that the moon doesn't move at constant speed across the sky, but accelerates and decelerates in a pattern that takes sophisticated mathematics to describe. Differential gearing wouldn't appear again in known historical mechanisms until medieval Islamic astronomical devices more than 1,000 years later. In European technology, differential gears wouldn't be reinvented until the 1700s. Let that sink in for a moment as you settle more deeply into rest. A device of such mechanical sophistication that it wouldn't be matched for over a millennium, built sometime around 100 BCE, possibly earlier, not a one-off experiment, but a carefully designed, precisely manufactured instrument that clearly represented a mature technology, meaning there must have been earlier, simpler versions leading up to this level of refinement. For decades after its discovery, the Antikythera Mechanism was something of an embarrassment to classical scholarship. It didn't fit neatly into the accepted understanding of ancient technology. The ancient Greeks were known for their philosophy, their mathematics, their art and literature. They were not supposed to have been building mechanical computers. Some scholars questioned whether it was genuinely ancient. Perhaps it had fallen into the wreck site later, they suggested, though this made no sense given where and how it was found. Others suggested it must have been a unique creation, a one-time achievement by a singular genius, and therefore not representative of broader technological capabilities. But as research continued, as new imaging technologies allowed non-destructive examination of the corroded fragments, a different picture emerged. In the 1970s, a physicist named Derek de Sola Price conducted extensive X-ray analysis of the mechanism. His work revealed previously unknown gears and inscriptions, allowing him to propose the first comprehensive model of how the entire device worked. His research, published in a landmark paper in 1974, established that the mechanism was definitely ancient, definitely functional, and definitely represented a level of technological achievement that scholars had not previously believed possible for that era. Subsequent research using ever more sophisticated imaging techniques has continued to reveal new details. In the 2000s, a team led by mathematician Tony Freeth used high-resolution X-ray computed tomography, essentially medical CT scanning, applied to ancient bronze, to create three-dimensional maps of the internal structure. They discovered new gears, new inscriptions, new aspects of functionality. The inscriptions were particularly revealing. The device came with what amounted to an instruction manual, inscribed in tiny Greek letters on the bronze plates. These texts described how to use the mechanism, what astronomical phenomena it predicted, and included references to specific dates and cycles. The language was technical, but clear. This was meant to be used, not merely admired. Reading these ancient instructions, we get a glimpse of how someone in the 1st century BCE might have interacted with the device. You would turn the hand crank, watching the pointers move across the dials. You might set it to a particular date, perhaps your birthday, or the date of an important civic festival, and then advance it forward, watching where the celestial bodies would be in the future. If you were planning a voyage, you could check whether an eclipse might occur, as eclipses were considered powerful omens. If you were planning a religious ceremony, you could ensure it aligned with appropriate celestial configurations. The mechanism democratized astronomical knowledge in a way. Previously, predicting celestial positions required extensive training in mathematics and access to astronomical tables compiled over generations. With this device, someone with minimal training could turn a crank and read the answer from a dial. Who built it? We don't know for certain. The workmanship suggests someone with access to high-quality bronze and precision tools. The astronomical theory it embodies reflects knowledge from various sources: Babylonian eclipse prediction methods, Greek geometric models of planetary motion, Egyptian calendar systems. This was not provincial knowledge, but cosmopolitan sophistication, drawing on the best understanding from across the Mediterranean world. The island of Rhodes, not far from Antikythera, was known in antiquity as a center of astronomical research. The astronomer Hipparchus worked there in the 2nd century BCE, making observations and calculations that revolutionized understanding of celestial mechanics. Some scholars have suggested that the mechanism might have been built on Rhodes, possibly by followers or students of Hipparchus, though this remains speculative. Another possibility points to Syracuse, in Sicily, where Archimedes had lived and worked in the 3rd century BCE. Ancient sources describe Archimedes building devices that showed the motions of celestial bodies, what the Romans called planetaria. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, explicitly describes seeing a mechanism built by Archimedes that showed the sun, moon, and planets in their proper motions. Could the Antikythera Mechanism be a descendant of Archimedes' designs, built by craftsmen working in his tradition a century or more after his death? We cannot know. The device keeps its secrets, revealing itself only slowly to modern analysis. What we do know is that the ship carrying it sank sometime in the 1st century BCE, probably around 70-60 BCE based on pottery and coin dating. The ship was traveling from the eastern Mediterranean, possibly from Rhodes, possibly from Asia Minor, heading west, probably toward Rome. It was a cargo vessel carrying luxury goods. The statues were likely destined for wealthy Roman villas, the glassware for elegant banquets, the wine in the amphorae for refined palates, and among this cargo of beautiful things was the mechanism, carefully packed, being transported perhaps as a gift or as a sale item for a wealthy patron who appreciated sophisticated instruments. The ship never completed its journey. Perhaps it was a storm. Perhaps the captain misjudged the currents around Antikythera. Perhaps the ship was simply too heavily loaded, riding too low in the water. The wooden hull struck rocks or foundered in rough seas, and everything sank. The statues and wine, the glassware and jewelry, the mechanism with its precisely cut gears and inscribed instructions. For 2,000 years, it lay on the bottom. Bronze is durable in seawater. It corrodes, but doesn't dissolve quickly, so the mechanism survived, though encrusted with limestone deposits and partially fused into an unrecognizable lump. The wooden frame rotted away. The smaller, more delicate pieces were lost, but enough remained that when Elias Stadiatis descended in his canvas suit in 1900, when the fragments were brought to the surface and eventually examined, the outlines of ancient genius could still be discerned. The philosophical implications are unsettling if you contemplate them as you drift toward sleep. This level of technology existed. It was real. It functioned, and then it was lost. Not just the specific device that sank off Antikythera, but the entire tradition of building such mechanisms. The knowledge of how to cut precise gears, how to calculate gear ratios for astronomical modeling, how to miniaturize complex mechanisms into portable instruments. All of this vanished from the historical record. There are hints in ancient texts that such devices existed in multiple locations. Cicero's description of Archimedes' planetarium references in other sources to automated temples, mechanical theaters, astronomical instruments, but no other physical examples have survived, or at least none have been found yet. Why? How does a sophisticated technology disappear? Part of the answer lies in materials. The mechanism was made of bronze, which is valuable. When such devices broke or became obsolete, the bronze would be melted down and reused. Unlike pottery, which breaks into worthless shards and gets discarded in large quantities, leaving an abundant archaeological record, bronze objects tend to be recycled. We have relatively few bronze artifacts from antiquity compared to ceramics, even though bronze was widely used. Another part of the answer is social disruption. The late Hellenistic period and the early Roman Empire saw enormous political upheaval, wars, invasions, regime changes. The great libraries and research centers, Alexandria, Pergamon, Rhodes, were damaged, looted, or eventually declined. Scholars who knew how to build these devices died without successors, or their workshops were destroyed, or the patronage that supported such expensive projects dried up. Knowledge, especially technical knowledge, embodied in physical skills rather than written texts, is fragile. If the lineage of master craftsmen training apprentices is broken, entire technologies can be lost in a single generation. You can have written descriptions. Indeed, some ancient texts do describe complex mechanisms, but without hands-on training, without the accumulated expertise of how bronze behaves when being cut, how to achieve precise tolerances, how to troubleshoot when gears don't mesh properly, the knowledge remains theoretical and unusable. The Antikythera Mechanism represents a peak of Hellenistic technology, a moment when Greek mathematics, Babylonian astronomical observation, fine metalworking, and wealthy patronage all converged. But that moment was temporary. The conditions that allowed such sophisticated instruments to be built didn't last, and once they were gone, the technology went with them. What else was lost? This is the haunting question that emerges from contemplating the mechanism. If something this sophisticated could exist and then be forgotten so completely that scholars in 1900 initially doubted its antiquity, what else existed? What other ancient technologies reached levels we haven't imagined, only to disappear without leaving traces we've yet discovered? Ancient texts mention steam-powered devices, automated puppets, mechanical gardens where bronze birds sang. Some of these descriptions are clearly exaggerated or misunderstood, but given that the Antikythera mechanism was real, we must take seriously the possibility that other remarkable devices existed too. The library at Alexandria reportedly contained tens of thousands of scrolls, including technical treatises, engineering manuals, scientific observations. Almost none survived. What was lost when that library burned? What innovations and discoveries simply ceased to exist because the only copies of the texts describing them were destroyed? Roman concrete was, in some formulations, more durable than modern concrete. Some Roman buildings have stood for 2,000 years, while modern structures crumble after decades. The specific recipe for Roman maritime concrete, which could set underwater and actually grew stronger in seawater, was lost for centuries and only recently rediscovered through chemical analysis. For over 1,000 years, we simply didn't know how they did it. Damascus steel, the legendary material for the sword blades, was renowned for its strength and sharpness. The technique for making it was lost by the 18th century. Modern metallurgists can analyze ancient Damascus steel blades, can see the crystalline structures that gave the metal its properties, but replicating the exact process remains difficult. Greek fire, the incendiary weapon that allowed the Byzantine Empire to defend Constantinople against multiple sieges, was a closely guarded secret. When the Byzantine Empire fell, the secret was lost with it. We have descriptions of its effects. It burned on water, couldn't be extinguished with water, terrified enemy fleets, but we don't know exactly what it was made of or how it was produced. These losses aren't ancient history in the sense of being fully resolved. They're active mysteries, gaps in our knowledge where we know something existed but don't know how it worked. The Antikythera Mechanism forces us to reconsider how we think about technological progress. We tend to imagine it as a steady march forward, each generation building on the achievements of the previous one, knowledge accumulating over time. The reality is messier. Technologies appear, flourish for a time, and then vanish. Knowledge is gained and lost. Progress is not inevitable or unidirectional, lying in the dark, drifting between waking and sleep. You might imagine the device as it was when new, the bronze gears gleaming, precisely cut and smoothly meshing, the inscriptions sharp and clear, the hand crank turning easily, the pointers moving across the dials with mechanical accuracy, showing the dance of celestial bodies according to mathematical laws that the builders understood deeply enough to encode in bronze. Someone, we don't know who, held that crank and turned it. They watched the moon pointer track across its spiral, saw how the mechanism predicted when the moon would darken in eclipse. They might have felt something we can relate to, the satisfaction of seeing a complex system work correctly, of watching mathematics made physical, of holding in their hands a device that extended their mental capabilities. And then the ship sank. The mechanism corroded. The tradition that built it faded. For 2,000 years, the gears lay still, no hand turning the crank. The astronomical predictions frozen at whatever date they'd last been set to, until Elias Stadiatis descended through the cold water and found the wreck, until Valerio Stays noticed gears in the corroded bronze, until decades of research using technologies the ancient builders couldn't have imagined. X-rays, computed tomography, three-dimensional modeling, slowly revealed what had been created and lost. We can build replicas now. The gear ratios have been calculated. The astronomical functions are understood. Working models have been constructed that demonstrate how the original must have functioned. In a sense, the technology has been recovered, but something is still lost. We have the what, but not the why. We can see what the mechanism did, but not fully understand its social context. Who used these devices? Were they common among wealthy intellectuals or extremely rare? Were they teaching tools, demonstration pieces, practical instruments for actual astronomical prediction, or some combination? The inscriptions suggest practical use. They explain how to operate the mechanism for real astronomical calculations, not merely for demonstration. But we don't know if astronomical calculations were something wealthy Romans did casually, the way we might check weather forecasts, or if this was specialized knowledge used for specific purposes like planning agricultural activities or determining auspicious dates for important events. We don't know if the mechanism being transported to Rome was a finished product or a broken device being sent for repair. We don't know if the buyer was a patron who understood astronomy or simply someone who collected impressive devices. We don't know if the builder was famous in their time or an anonymous craftsman. All of this context, the living, breathing world in which the mechanism was created and used, is lost. We have the artifact, but the culture that produced it is accessible only through fragments and inferences. This is the persistent melancholy of archaeology. We can recover objects, but not experience. We can analyze bronze gears, but not recreate the moment when someone first saw the completed mechanism demonstrated, watching the dials move, and understanding that human craft had successfully modeled the heavens. Let these thoughts ease you deeper into rest. The mechanism lies now in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Its fragments displayed in climate-controlled cases. Scholars continue to study it. New papers are published. New details discovered. The bronze gears, corroded and ancient, still teach us things about the past we thought we understood. And somewhere on the Mediterranean floor, possibly near other ancient wrecks, possibly in places where no diver has yet descended, there might be other devices, other mechanisms, other evidence of ancient sophistication waiting in the cold darkness to be found. The sea keeps its secrets until it chooses to reveal them. The wreck at Antikythera was discovered by chance, a storm forcing divers to shelter near that particular island, a man happening to descend at that particular spot. How many other wrecks, carrying how many other remarkable objects, lie undiscovered? We will likely never know. The Mediterranean is deep and vast. Modern technology can map the sea floor, can identify anomalies that might be shipwrecks, but investigating every possible site is beyond current capabilities. Most ancient ships that sank will remain hidden. This, too, is worth contemplating as sleep approaches. History is not the totality of the past, but only those fragments that survived and that we happened to find. For every artifact in a museum, thousands were lost. For every ancient text that survived, hundreds or thousands didn't. Our understanding of antiquity is built on shards and remnants, the lucky survivors of 2,000 years of time, weather, war, and simple neglect. The Antikythera Mechanism survived by accident, sinking in deep water where it was protected from corrosion by becoming encrusted in limestone, resting in a location where eventually Greek sponge divers worked, being brought up at a time when scholars were capable of recognizing its significance. Even in corroded form, change any of those factors, and it would have been lost. If the ship had sunk in shallower water, the mechanism might have been more thoroughly corroded or scattered by currents. If it had been found by divers at a time when bronze artifacts were routinely melted down, it might have been destroyed for its metal content. If it had been examined in the 19th century, before X-ray technology, its internal structure might never have been understood. We are extraordinarily fortunate that it survived and that we can study it. But that very fortune underscores how much we've lost. Rest now in this knowledge. The ancient world was more sophisticated than we often imagine. The people of 2,000 years ago were fully human, fully intelligent, capable of achievements that still impress. They built devices we're only now beginning to understand. They understood mathematics and astronomy at levels that wouldn't be regained for over a millennium after their civilization declined. And yet they were also mortal, and their achievements were mortal too. Knowledge was lost, technologies disappeared, entire libraries of human understanding went up in flames or slowly rotted away. We stand on the shoulders of giants, but many of those giants are invisible to us now. Their specific contributions lost to time, leaving only hints and shadows, and occasionally a corroded bronze mechanism pulled from the deep. The gears no longer turn. The dials no longer point to accurate astronomical positions, but the mechanism remains. Silent testimony to human ingenuity, to the heights we can reach, and to the fragility of those heights, to the way knowledge can be both discovered and lost, found and forgotten, celebrated and buried beneath the waves of time. Let it carry you down now, down like a diver descending through cool water, down toward rest and the quiet darkness where ancient things wait patiently to be remembered. A day in the villa of a Roman naval commander. Let us ascend now from the depths, from corroded mechanisms and lost knowledge, and return to the world of the living, but not to the rowing benches, not to the chained and suffering. Instead, imagine yourself in a place where the sea is beautiful, where maritime power translates into comfort and privilege, where command of ships means a life of refinement and ease. Picture a villa on the Bay of Naples, built into the cliffs overlooking water, so blue it seems artificial in its intensity. The villa is substantial, not the largest in the region, for there are senators and imperial favorites with even grander estates, but impressive nonetheless. White marble columns frame the entrance. The roof tiles are terracotta, faded by sun to a warm orange. Gardens cascade down the hillside in carefully engineered terraces, each level planted with specific varieties of flowers and herbs chosen for their colors and fragrances. This is the home of a navarch, fleet commander in Rome's naval forces. He is not Agrippa, not a figure of historical importance, but rather a representative of the class of men who administered Rome's maritime power. His name does not appear in the histories, but his life, comfortable and ordered, represents the reality of Roman naval aristocracy. The day begins before dawn. This is not the harsh awakening of the rowing deck, not the brutal beginning of mechanical labor. Here, dawn comes gently. The navarch wakes in his cubiculum, his bedroom, where the mattress is stuffed with wool and the coverlet is woven from Egyptian cotton, soft against the skin. The room is small by design, following Roman architectural principles that favor intimacy over grandeur in private sleeping spaces. But every surface shows wealth. Painted frescoes on the walls depicting scenes from mythology, small bronze oil lamps in wall niches, a polished wooden chest inlaid with ivory for storing personal items. He lies still for a moment, allowing consciousness to return gradually. Through the small window, the first light is touching the bay. From somewhere in the villa, he can hear the quiet sounds of the household waking. Slaves moving through corridors, beginning the day's work. The rhythm of a wealthy household is like the rhythm of a well-run ship. Everyone has their role. Everyone knows their tasks, and the whole functions smoothly when properly managed. The navarch rises and dons a simple tunic, not the formal toga he'll wear later if he has public business, but a comfortable house tunic in undyed linen. His feet slide into leather sandals. He runs fingers through hair that is beginning to gray at the temples. He is perhaps 45 years old enough to have earned his position through decades of service, young enough that his body hasn't yet betrayed him with the aches that come with true age. His first destination is the Lararium, the household shrine located in the atrium. This is a small aedicule, a temple in miniature, built into an alcove and decorated with paintings of the household gods. The lairs, the guardian spirits of the home, are depicted as young men in dancing poses, holding drinking horns. Between them stands the genius of the household, the spirit of the family line itself, portrayed as a man with his head veiled, holding a pedera for libations. The navarch is not particularly devout. Few educated Romans of his class are, in the emotional sense, but he is scrupulous about the rituals. Religion in Rome is less about personal belief and more about maintaining proper relationships with the divine powers, fulfilling obligations, ensuring that the Pax Diorum, the peace with the gods, remains intact. A slave has already prepared the materials: a small bronze dish with incense, a pedera containing wine mixed with a few drops of honey, a plate with a piece of bread. The navarch sprinkles incense on the charcoal in the brazier. The scent rises immediately. Frankincense, imported from Arabia, sweet and resinous, He pours wine from the patera onto the small altar, watching the liquid darken the stone. He places the bread on the offering plate. Then he adds something specific to his profession, a small prayer to Neptune, god of the sea. He owns this prosperity to maritime service, and Neptune must be acknowledged. The prayer is formulaic, learned in childhood. Neptune, Lord of the waters, guardian of those who travel the deep, accept this offering and grant favorable winds to Rome's fleets. Keep safe those who serve under my command. Turn your trident away from our ships. Does he believe Neptune hears? Perhaps. Perhaps not, but the ritual has been performed, the obligation fulfilled. He can proceed with his day. From the lararium, he moves through the villa toward the private bath complex. The household is larger now, slaves moving more visibly, some carrying water, others beginning to prepare the morning meal. They step aside as he passes, their eyes lowered respectfully. He has owned some of these people for decades. That girl carrying linens is the daughter of his old body slave, born in this household, knowing no other life. That elderly man, supervising the kitchen slaves, was captured in the Gallic campaigns and has served here for 25 years, gradually rising to a position of responsibility. The Navarch doesn't think much about their inner lives. They are part of the household machinery, like the cisterns that store water or the hippocaust that heats the floors. When they perform well, he doesn't notice. When they fail in their duties, he corrects them, sometimes with words, sometimes with the lash, depending on the severity and his mood. This is not cruelty in his understanding. It is simply proper household management. The same principles he applies to managing crews and maintaining ships. The bath complex is attached to the villa, but slightly separate, built partially into the hillside. It is smaller than the public baths in the nearest city, but follows the same general design, a progression through rooms of different temperatures, culminating in the physical and spiritual cleansing that Romans consider essential to civilized life. He enters the tepidarium first, the warm room. The floor is gently heated by the hippocaust system. Below, warm enough to be comfortable, but not hot. He removes his tunic, handing it to an attending slave. His body, naked now, shows the history of a life lived in comfort. There is some softness around the middle, the inevitable consequence of good food and minimal physical labor, but his shoulders and arms retain some muscularity. He trained in weapons in his youth and still practices occasionally. A few scars mark his skin, one on his left shoulder from a sword training accident in his 20s, another on his thigh from a fall on a ship's deck during a storm years ago. The slave applies oil to his skin, olive oil scented with lavender. The massage that follows is not perfunctory. The slave has been trained in the art of massage, understands which muscles carry tension, applies pressure that is firm but not painful. The Navarch closes his eyes, feeling knots in his shoulders release, feeling the warmth of the room and the skilled hands working his flesh, easing him into a state of complete physical relaxation. After perhaps 20 minutes, he moves to the caldarium, the hot room. The heat here is intense, produced by the hypocaust furnace below, bringing the floor tiles to a temperature that would burn unprotected feet. He sits on a raised marble bench, breathing in the hot, slightly humid air. Sweat begins to form on his skin almost immediately. This is the purification, the drawing out of impurities through the pores. Time becomes elastic in the heat. He might sit here for 10 minutes or 30. There's no urgency, no schedule pressing him. Thoughts drift through his mind without structure. He thinks about reports he needs to review, about a subordinate captain who has been requesting a meeting, about the dinner party he's hosting this evening, and whether the cook has properly prepared the peacock, about his daughter, who is approaching marriageable age and will need a suitable husband soon. When the heat becomes too much, he signals. The slave helps him to the frigidarium, the cold room with its plunge pool. The water is genuinely cold, drawn from a spring and kept cool in the underground cistern. The shock of it after the caldarium heat is almost violent, but it's also invigorating, waking every nerve ending, making him gasp involuntarily. He emerges clean, truly clean in the Roman sense, not merely washed, but purified. The layers of oil and sweat and dirt scraped away by the strigil. The curved bronze blade the slave uses with practiced efficiency. He's been oiled again with finer oils now. Something with myrrh, perhaps. Certainly expensive. His skin glows. He feels ready for the day. Back in his cubiculum, he dresses more formally. A fresh tunic, this one whiter and of finer weave. Over it, if he has official business, he might wear a toga, though the toga is falling somewhat out of fashion among practical men, retained primarily for formal occasions. Instead, he chooses a synthesis, a comfortable outfit suitable for receiving visitors, without the cumbersome formality of the toga. He breaks his fast simply. Romans typically don't eat heavily in the morning. A piece of bread, some cheese, perhaps an apple from the orchard. He eats standing in the peristyle, the colonnaded courtyard garden at the villa's heart. The sun is fully up now, illuminating the garden's careful design. There are roses, their fragrance heavy in the morning air. Carefully trimmed hedges of boxwood create geometric patterns. A fountain plays in the center, the water's sound soothing and constant. Marble statuary stands at intervals. A Venus, a Hercules, a portrait bust of the emperor. By mid-morning, he's in his tablinum, the office space that serves as the villa's administrative center. This room opens onto the peristyle on one side and has a view of the bay on the other. The floor is mosaic, a geometric pattern in black and white tesserae, with a central panel showing Neptune in his chariot, drawn by hippocampi. The desk is wooden, scarred by decades of use. On it are spread various documents, correspondence on papyrus, some military reports on longer-lasting parchment, a map of the Western Mediterranean, showing naval patrol routes and known pirate havens. There are writing implements, bronze styluses for wax tablets, reed pens and ink for more permanent correspondence, a small bronze lamp, even though it's daylight. The light might be needed for reading some of the more cramped handwriting. A slave enters, this one educated, literate, serving as a kind of secretary. He carries more correspondence that arrived this morning, brought by military courier from the naval headquarters at Messinum. The Navarch begins working through the documents. Here is a report from a subordinate captain commanding a patrol squadron off the coast of Sicily. No significant pirate activity, routine stops of merchant vessels for inspection. One ship detained for smuggling untaxed goods. The captain requests instructions on disposition. The Navarch makes notes in the wax tablet beside him, dictating his response for the secretary to transcribe later onto proper papyrus. Another document, a requisition request for repairs to 3 vessels, listing specific timber needs, bronze fittings for rams, replacement oars. The costs are substantial. The Navarch cross-references with his budget allocation. He has some discretionary authority, but major expenditures need approval from higher command. He approves what he can, flags the rest for referral upward. A personal letter, this one on higher quality papyrus and sealed with wax bearing a familiar seal. It's from a fellow officer, a man he served with years ago, now commanding a fleet in the East. The letter is chatty, mixing personal news with professional gossip. So-and-so has been promoted. Someone else has fallen from favor. There are rumors of increased pirate activity near Crete. His friend's son is showing promise in his first command posting. The Navarch smiles, reading it. This is his world, not the grand politics of senators and emperors, but the network of naval officers who have spent their careers managing Rome's maritime power. They know each other, serve together, compete for postings and promotions, marry their children to each other's children, creating a closed social circle that spans the Mediterranean. He dictates a response to be written later in his own hand, since this is personal correspondence between equals, not official business. He'll mention his daughter's approaching marriage. Ability, perhaps his friend has a suitable son. The morning continues in this vein. Papers are reviewed, decisions made, correspondence drafted. It is administrative work, the kind that keeps any large organization functioning. Not glorious, but essential. Ships don't repair themselves. Crews don't organize themselves. Supply chains don't manage themselves. Behind every fleet action, every patrol, every show of Roman naval power lies a mountain of paperwork and a web of decisions made by men like him, sitting in comfortable offices, working through reports and requests. Around midday, the secretary indicates that everything urgent has been addressed. The Navarch nods dismissal and rises, stretching. His back is slightly stiff from sitting. He's not as young as he was, and sedentary work takes its toll. Time for the midday meal. The Sina, the main meal of the Roman day. The triclinium, the dining room, is one of the villa's showpieces. 3 couches are arranged around a central space in the traditional configuration that gives the room its name. The couches are cushioned and covered with fabric dyed in expensive purples and blues. The walls are painted in the 4th Pompeian style, with elaborate architectural fantasies, painted columns, and imaginary windows opening onto impossible vistas. Today, he dines alone, or rather with just his wife and adult son. The son is visiting from Rome, where he's beginning his own career in the cursus honorum, the sequence of offices that ambitious young Romans climb. The wife oversees the household, as Roman matrons do, managing the slaves, the provisions, the social obligations. They recline on the couches, not sitting, but lying on their left sides, propped on elbow cushions. In the traditional posture, a slave brings water for hand washing, poured from an ornate bronze pitcher into a matching basin. The meal begins. First course, oysters, brought fresh that morning from the oyster beds at Baiae, served raw in their shells, with a sauce of vinegar and herbs. The navarch uses a small bronze pick to extract the meat, slurps it down. The taste is intensely of the sea, briny, slightly sweet, with the vinegar adding sharpness. These are expensive. Oysters from Britannia are even more prized, shipped alive in barrels of seawater, but those are reserved for special occasions. Next, a salad of young greens dressed with olive oil and garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans add to nearly everything. The garum is high quality, imported from Hispania, where the best garum makers practice their craft. It adds a savory depth, what we might call umami, transforming simple lettuce into something luxurious. The main course arrives. Peacock, prepared whole and elaborately. The bird has been roasted, then its feathers carefully replaced to make it appear alive. This is conspicuous consumption, theatrical display of wealth. Peacock doesn't taste notably better than chicken, arguably worse, the meat being tougher, but it costs far more and looks spectacular. The point is not the eating, but the showing. The Greek chef who prepared it stands by as a slave carves, ready to accept compliments. The navarch praises the preparation. The peacock is served with a complex sauce involving dates, pepper, wine, and honey. The flavors are aggressive by modern standards. Very sweet, very savory, very spiced, all at once. With the meal comes wine, Falernian, from the famous vineyards of Campania. The wine is strong and sweet, almost syrupy in consistency. It's mixed with water in a large bronze crater, according to proper custom. Drinking unmixed wine is considered barbaric. The mixture is perhaps 3 parts water to 1 part wine, enough to provide the pleasant glow of intoxication without drunkenness. Conversation flows easily. The son talks about political maneuverings in Rome, who's aligning with whom, which senator is gaining influence. The wife mentions social obligations. They're expected at another villa next week for a dinner party, a formal affair requiring careful attention to dress and gift-giving, the Navarch discusses his morning correspondence, mentions the possible marriage alliance with his old friend's family. They eat reclining for perhaps 2 hours, the meal punctuated with courses of fruit, figs, grapes, apples, and sweet pastries drizzled with honey. Slaves move silently around them, refilling wine cups, clearing away empty dishes, anticipating needs before they're voiced. This is the rhythm of privilege. Time stretches out, unhurried. No bell summons them to labor. No overseer watches their every movement. No chain restricts their motion. They exist in a bubble of comfort, insulated from the struggles of those below them by wealth and status. After the meal, the afternoon opens before the Navarts with pleasant possibility. His wife retires to her quarters to supervise some household matter. His son goes to the library to read. The villa has a small but respectable collection of scrolls, Greek and Latin classics, properly catalogued. The Navarch decides to inspect his personal vessel. He owns a small trireme moored at the private dock that extends from the villa's lowest terrace into the bay. This is not a warship in active service, but rather a personal yacht, a vessel for pleasure cruising and occasional transport. Owning such a ship is a status symbol, demonstrating both wealth and connection to naval tradition. He walks down through the terraced gardens, past olive trees and cypresses, down stone steps that switch back and forth along the cliff face. The air grows fresher as he descends, the sea breeze stronger. By the time he reaches dock level, he can taste salt on his lips. The trireme bobs gently at anchor. It's perhaps 80 feet long, sleeker and lighter than a military vessel, with fewer rowers, perhaps 90 instead of the standard 170. These rowers are slaves from his own household, trained specifically for this purpose. They row when he wants to cruise the bay, when he needs transport to visit a neighboring villa, when he feels like taking guests out to view the coastline from the water. The ship is beautiful in the way only a well-maintained vessel can be. The wood is oiled and gleaming. Bronze fittings are polished. The sail, furled now, is dyed a deep blue. The prow is decorated with painted eyes, an ancient tradition meant to help the ship see its way. The Navarch walks along the dock, examining the vessel with a critical eye. Here is a section of railing that needs repair. He makes a mental note to have slaves attend to it. There is some minor damage to one of the visible oars, but overall, the vessel is in excellent condition, ready to be deployed whenever he wishes. He does not board, does not descend to the rowing deck where his slaves would sit chained when the ship is in use. Those spaces are not for him. His place, when aboard, is on the deck in the small covered area at the stern where cushions are arranged, where he can recline comfortably while the ship glides across the water, powered by human muscle. He does not have to see. He stands for a while, looking out across the bay. Other villas dot the coastline, Their white marble, bright against the dark green of pine and cypress. Small fishing boats work the waters closer in, farther out. Larger merchant vessels with rust-colored sails move ponderously toward or away from Puteoli, the major port nearby. This is his world, ordered, beautiful, comfortable. The sea is not a place of suffering here, but a source of pleasure and profit. The ships that move across it are instruments of his will, extensions of Roman power that he helps administer. Does he ever think about the men below decks, about the chained rowers whose bodies power these vessels? Perhaps occasionally, in the abstract, but they are so far removed from his daily experience, so outside his social sphere, that they barely register as fully human in his consciousness. They are tools, necessary components of maritime technology, no more worthy of sustained consideration than the oars themselves, or the bronze rams. This is not exceptional cruelty on his part. This is simply the moral landscape of Roman society, the casual acceptance of hierarchy and slavery that permeates every level of existence. He is kind to his household slaves, relatively, because they serve him directly and their well-being affects his comfort. But the gallery slaves he commands, when on active duty, they are abstractions, statistics in reports, bodies that wear out and need replacing like any other equipment. He walks back up toward the villa, moving slowly, enjoying the afternoon sun, the views of the bay, the pleasant physical tiredness from the walk down and back up the stepped path. In the villa's peristyle, he finds a guest has arrived, a philosopher, a Greek freedman who serves as a kind of intellectual companion to several wealthy Romans in the area. The man makes his living by visiting villas, engaging in elevated conversation, tutoring the children of the elite in rhetoric and philosophy. They settle in the shade of the portico, slaves bringing wine and water, cushions arranged for comfort. The conversation ranges widely. Politics, literature, the nature of virtue, whether the Stoic or Epicurean path offers better guidance for living well. The Navarch is educated in the Roman fashion. He knows his Greek classics, can quote Homer and Euripides, understands the basics of philosophical schools. He enjoys these conversations, finds them intellectually stimulating, a pleasant way to pass afternoon hours. The philosopher speaks eloquently about fate and freedom, about whether men truly control their destinies or whether everything is predetermined by the gods. It's a familiar debate, centuries old, and they explore it without expecting new conclusions. The pleasure is in the discussion itself, in the rhetorical flourishes, in demonstrating education and refinement. Neither man is troubled by the irony of discussing freedom while surrounded by slaves whose every movement is controlled, whose lives are entirely subject to others' will. Freedom, in their discourse, is a philosophical concept relevant to citizens, to men of status. It doesn't extend to those outside the circle of privilege. Evening approaches gradually. The shadows lengthen across the peristyle garden. The air cools slightly, though it remains warm. It's summer in Campania, and true coolness won't arrive until well after sunset. The philosopher takes his leave, thanking his host for the hospitality and the stimulating conversation. He'll walk to the next villa on his circuit, arriving in time for their evening meal, earning his supper and his fee through clever talk. The Navarch prepares for his own evening entertainment. Tonight he's hosting a cena, a formal dinner party. Invitations were sent days ago to select neighbors and colleagues, a senator who has a villa nearby, 2 fellow naval officers with their wives, a wealthy merchant who does business supplying the fleet. The triclinium is prepared. Oil lamps are lit, dozens of them, creating a warm glow. The couches are freshly covered. Garlands of flowers are hung. The tables that will hold the food are polished. The household has been preparing all day, cooking, cleaning, arranging. The guests arrive as the last light fades from the sky. They come in litters, carried by slaves, or in some cases, walking from nearby villas, attended by their own servants, who carry torches to light the way. There are greetings, embraces, compliments on the villa's appearance. The guests are dressed in their finest. The senator in a toga of exceptional whiteness, his wife in an elaborate stola with gold jewelry, the merchant displaying his wealth through the purple hem on his tunic and the rings on every finger. They recline on the couches according to a carefully calculated arrangement, status, and social hierarchy, determining who lies where, who has the place of honor, who is positioned for easier conversation with whom. This seating arrangement is a subtle art, one that the Navarch's wife has overseen carefully. The meal that follows is more elaborate than the midday cena, course after course. Dormice stuffed with pork and pine nuts, mullet in complex sauces, whole wild boar carried in on a platter so large it requires 2 slaves to lift it. Each dish is announced, explained, admired for its presentation before being consumed. Wine flows freely, still mixed with water, but perhaps less diluted than at midday. Conversation grows louder, more animated. They discuss politics, carefully, since one never knows who might repeat what. They discuss mutual acquaintances, spreading gossip with evident pleasure. They discuss business, making subtle arrangements for future cooperation. They discuss art and literature, demonstrating their cultural refinement. Entertainment is provided between courses. Musicians play a water organ, flutes, a cithara. The music is pleasant, fills the spaces in conversation without overwhelming it. Then dancers, young and graceful, moving through choreographed routines that blend athleticism and artistry. The merchant tells a scandalous story about a senator who was caught with another man's wife. Everyone laughs, some more cautiously than others. The senator present counters with a story about provincial governors growing rich through corruption. More laughter. The line between humor and actual critique is deliberately blurred. Jokes allow them to say things that might otherwise be dangerous. Dice games begin on the side. Romans love gambling, despite periodic legal restrictions. They play with tesserae, small bone dice, the spots marked in contrasting materials. Small amounts of money change hands. This is entertainment, not serious gambling. But even so, there's real excitement in the rolls. Real pleasure in winning, or good-natured complaint about bad luck. The meal extends for hours. More courses appear. Pastries soaked in honey, fresh fruits, nuts, cheese. Some guests recline looking satisfied. Others show signs of overindulgence. Faces flushed from wine and rich food. A slave stands ready with a basin in case anyone needs to vomit. Purging the stomach to make room for more food is not unusual at elaborate Roman dinners, though considered poor form to do too, obviously. Someone suggests a reading. They send a slave to the library to fetch a scroll. He returns with Homer, the Odyssey. A slave who has been trained in proper recitation stands and begins to read aloud, his voice trained to carry, to provide proper emphasis, to make the ancient Greek verses come alive. They listen to the tale of Odysseus, of his long voyage home, his struggles against divine will and natural disaster, his eventual return to Ithaca. It's a story they all know intimately, have heard since childhood, but it never loses its power. The sea that Odysseus traveled is the same sea visible from this villa. The struggles he faced against waves and wind are struggles that Roman sailors still face, though now backed by Roman organization and power. As the reading continues, some guests drift into comfortable drowsiness, lulled by wine and food and the rhythmic verses. Others listen attentively, occasionally nodding at particularly beautiful passages. The Navarch feels contentment wash over him. This evening has been successful, his status confirmed, his social obligations fulfilled. Eventually, the party begins to wind down. The eastern sky shows the faintest hint of approaching dawn. They've been dining and talking and gaming nearly all night, the way successful Roman dinner parties often extend. The guests begin taking their leave, calling for their litters or torches, making their way back to their own villas, with protestations of thanks and enjoyment. The Navarch bids them farewell, standing at the entrance, watching the litters disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, their torches bobbing like fireflies. When the last guest has gone, he returns to the triclinium. Slaves are already beginning to clean, moving efficiently through the room, clearing dishes, extinguishing lamps. The floor is littered with the debris of the feast: bones, nutshells, flower petals, spilled wine. By morning, it will all be gone. The room restored to perfection, ready for the next occasion. The Navarch makes his way to his cubiculum. He is pleasantly tired, well fed, slightly drunk in the comfortable way that comes from good wine, consumed over many hours. He removes his formal attire, lies down on his bed. Through his window, he can see the first true light of dawn touching the bay, turning the water from black to deepest blue. He closes his eyes. His day has been full. Rituals performed, business conducted, social obligations met. He has lived as a man of his class and era lives, surrounded by beauty and comfort, secure in his position, attended by slaves whose labor makes his leisure possible, connected to a network of similar men who together administer an empire. He does not think about the rowers as he falls asleep. He does not imagine the dawn awakening men chained to benches, the beginning of another day of mechanical labors. Those men exist in a different world, though that world makes his world possible. He sleeps deeply, dreamlessly, in comfort and security. The villa is quiet now, except for the slaves continuing their work, the invisible labor that maintains the visible perfection. The sun rises over the Bay of Naples, illuminating marble and mosaic, garden and dock, the private trireme bobbing at anchor, and the distant merchant ships beginning their day's journeys. It is a beautiful morning. It will be a beautiful day for some. Conclusion. And so we return, at last, from our journey through Roman maritime life, from the darkness of the rowing deck to the marble terraces overlooking azure water, from anonymous suffering to recorded achievement, from lost mechanisms to living luxury. You have walked, in your mind, through worlds separated by only a few dozen feet of wooden planking, yet as distant from each other as different planets below deck, men chained to benches, their bodies reduced to engines of propulsion, their names forgotten before they even died. Above deck, commanders planning strategies, enjoying refined conversation, their lives chronicled, and their achievements celebrated. The same ship contained both realities, neither fully aware of the other, though one made the other possible. This was the foundation of Roman naval power, not merely the tactical genius of men like Agrippa, not merely the engineering sophistication suggested by devices like the Antikythera Mechanism, but the systematic organization of human suffering in service of imperial ambition. The ships that controlled the Mediterranean, that won the battles we remember, that projected Roman power across 3 continents, all were driven by forgotten men whose only memorial is the occasional skeleton found at a rowing bench, bones showing the distinctive deformities of their labor. Yet even in darkness, there were small mercies. The rhythm of rowing could become meditation. The community of suffering created bonds. Some men survived, adapted, found equilibrium, even in circumstances that seem unsurvivable to us now. The human capacity to normalize horror, to find meaning in meaningless repetition, to continue existing even when existence has been stripped to its barest elements. This too is part of the story. And alongside the cruelty was sophistication, the same civilization that chained men to rowing benches also produced the Antikythera Mechanism, that marvel of bronze gears and astronomical calculation. The Romans who built their empire on slavery also built aqueducts that still function 2 millennia later, created legal systems that influenced the world, wrote poetry and philosophy that we still read. Humans are capable of both breathtaking achievement and casual cruelty, often simultaneously. often without seeing the contradiction. The knowledge was lost, though. The mechanism sank and was forgotten. The techniques for building such devices faded. The great libraries burned. The precise recipe for Roman concrete was misplaced. Damascus steel became legend. Greek fire vanished with the empire that wielded it. Agrippa's ship designs were eventually superseded. The rowing galleys themselves became obsolete as sailing technology improved and gunpowder changed naval warfare. But for centuries, the system functioned as designed. Men rowed, commanders commanded, the empire endured. The hierarchies remained stable because everyone understood their place, from the slaves at the oars to the senator in his villa. This was not questioned, because this was simply how the world worked, how power was organized, how civilization functioned. We look back now with different eyes. From different moral landscapes, we see the injustice clearly, the horror of human beings treated as equipment, the casual acceptance of suffering that permeated every level of society. But we should be cautious about moral superiority. Our own world contains its own hierarchies, its own systematic exploitation, its own failures to see the humanity in those whose labor makes our comfort possible. The patterns change. Human nature remains remarkably constant. Let these thoughts ease you now toward the sleep that has been waiting patiently throughout this long night's journey into the past. You lie in comfort, a comfortable bed, in a room of your choosing, free to sleep or wake as you wish, unshackled, unmonitored, your body, your own. This is a privilege that most humans throughout most of history did not enjoy. The galley rowers would have considered your life impossibly luxurious, beyond the realm of imagination. Even the naval commander in his villa could not conceive of the technologies and freedoms you take for granted. The Mediterranean still rolls with its ancient rhythms, waves touching shores that have been touched by waves since before humans existed. The wrecks still lie on the bottom, their timbers long since rotted away, their bronze artifacts slowly corroding, their stories mostly lost. Occasionally, a diver descends and brings something back to light. A corroded mechanism, a marble statue, an amphora still sealed, and for a moment, we glimpse the past directly rather than through texts and speculation. But mostly, the past remains past. The rowers are gone. Agrippa is dust. The mechanism lies in a museum. Its gears still, but its purpose finally understood. The villa on the Bay of Naples is archaeological ruins, visited by tourists who snap photos and move on. The ships have all sunk or rotted. The empire that seemed eternal crumbled into fragments that became the foundations of other civilizations. And yet the stories remain, waiting to be told again, waiting for quiet moments like this, when we can slip backward through time and walk briefly in worlds that no longer exist, except in reconstruction and imagination. Rest now. Your journey is complete. The drum has fallen silent. The oars are shipped. The mechanism's gears are still. The villa is dark and empty. The bay is peaceful under starlight, as it was 2,000 years ago, as it will be long after we, too, have faded into the past. The waves continue their patient work, touching shore and retreating, touching shore and retreating, in rhythms older than Rome, older than civilization, older than memory itself. Let that rhythm carry you down, now, down into the deep waters of sleep, where the ancient wrecks rest, and the forgotten stories wait, and the distinction between past and present dissolves into the quiet darkness, where all eras become one. Sleep well. The past is patient. It will still be there when you wake, ready to share its stories again, ready to remind us who we were, and perhaps illuminate who we are. The Mediterranean is calm tonight. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, patterns the Antikythera Mechanism once predicted with bronze gears, patterns that guided ancient sailors, patterns that shine now on a world unimaginably different from the one that built galleys and enslaved rowers and conquered an empire. All things pass, all empires fall, all technologies are eventually lost or superseded. All lives, whether lived in chains or luxury, end in the same place. But the stories persist, passed down through generations, reconstructed from fragments, imagined from evidence, told again in quiet voices to ease the journey toward sleep. Rest now, knowing that you are separated from those ancient worlds by an ocean of time, yet connected to them by the unchanging essentials of human experience, the capacity for both cruelty and kindness, the drive to build and achieve, the vulnerability to suffering, the need for rest. The drum is silent, the gears are still, the villa is peaceful, and you, dear listener, can close your eyes and drift, carrying with you the weight of these stories, the knowledge of these contrasts, the understanding that history is written by those who had time to write it, built by those who had no choice but to build it, and remembered by those who come after, trying to make sense of it all. Sleep deeply. The past asks nothing of you now. It has shared its stories. It has revealed its secrets. It can wait, patient as stone, patient as the sea, until you are ready to listen again. Good night.